Hello and welcome, friends. In the last unit, we discussed about basics of composting process. In that, we got acquainted with composting as a process, the various stages that are involved in the composting process, as well as certain quality criteria for compost. In this particular unit, we wish to discuss about operational parameters such as organisms, moisture content, temperature, carbon to nitrogen ratio, seeding, and aeration, which could affect the composting process. So, as you learn the content, you will be able to explain these operational parameters that are factors affecting the composting process, as well as you will be able to estimate moisture content, carbon content, as well as C to N requirement to facilitate composting process. So, as you got acquainted in the unit 1 of this module, the composting is biological decomposition of organic constituents of waste under control conditions. The result of this decomposition process is crumbly nutritious material known as compost. This compost as a whole has got lot many benefits. Basically, it nourishes the quality of the soil. It considerably affects the quantity of the waste likely to join other processes as well as the ultimate disposal such as landfill site. It can be used along with the other fertilizers. It can enhance the soil retention ability as well as the fertility of the land and so many such things. However, as this compost is expected to meet certain quality criteria as we discussed in the last unit, which is specified by the Fertilizer Control Order FCO in subsequent amendments as published in 2009 as well as 2013, we have to be very cautious about the various stages of the compost because there is involvement of lot many stages, as well as this composting can be done through the variety of the processes. We can employ club variety of the techniques, and hence one must be very much cautious to attend some factors. So these factors we will discuss as we move ahead. The process as such is elaborated here. There is an involvement of certain mesophiles, thermophiles. The process is going through mesophilic phase, thermophilic phase, stability phase, as well as maturity phase. Variety of the bacteria as well as certain microorganisms are acting in this process. There is quite a considerable variation as far as this particular C by N ratio throughout this process, and hence this particular process needs to be controlled through these factors, namely microorganisms, moisture content, temperature, C to N ratio, seeding, as well as aeration. So the first factor that we wish to consider here is microorganisms. If we consider this graph, it is indicating the active composting, curing, as well as storage phase associated with the composting process at various temperatures. As we consider the bacterial activity under aerobic conditions, considerable heat is generated, and that heat may impart the temperature even more than 60 degrees centigrade in the compost pile. So as we consider this particular temperature of this, say 60 degrees centigrade, and so as it increases above that, because of the bacterial activity, the bacteria may not be able to cope up with that particular temperature, and accordingly there will be there will be decrease in the activity of the bacteria. So as you consider here, initially bacteria are active, say at the temperature range of 60 degrees centigrade up to 60 degrees centigrade. Initially some mesophiles will be active, afterwards thermophiles will take over. Accordingly, here as the reaction proceeds, the bacteria may even enter at the lateral stages. As we consider the temperature range of, say here 25 to 35 degrees centigrade, in that particular range actinomycetes as well as this particular fungi are active. So here initially some macroorganisms, maybe some ants, some sow-bugs, or certain toads, even the beetles, would be active in order to break down the larger particles, and subsequently the bacteria would take over in order to play different role with different materials. In general, we can say the bacteria are generally fast decomposers than the actinomycetes and fungi, but they mainly target the less complex compounds in the feedstock such as carbohydrates and proteins. Once these easily degraded materials are consumed, the bacterial population will decline, and accordingly the actinomycetes as well as fungi will take over. They will be becoming more predominant, and they will be responsible for the degradation of the cellulose as well as lignin like material. The next parameter is moisture content. As you see here, these are the particles subjected to the compost. There is a formation of liquid around the surface of that particular particles. So the bacteria will be active in these particular liquid films in addition to the surface of the particles which are subjected to the composting. In between these particles, there is a presence of free air space, which is essential to have the supply of the oxygen for aerobic action of this particular bacteria. However, if as this moisture is replacing the interstitial space among these particular particles, and if the entire space is filled, then there won't be any space in order to have the movement of the air. As such, the oxygen supply won't be appropriate, and there will be development of anaerobic conditions, and hence the composting process as such would be hampered. However, if we consider the total absence of this particular moisture, if the moisture content is too low, it won't be facilitating the development of this liquid film. Hence, there will be reduction in the microbial activity. The way we consider here, if the entire space is getting filled because of the moisture, then there will be absence of the oxygen and hence the anaerobic conditions would be developed. As such, the bacterial activity would be hampered. Hence, there has to be optimal moisture content of 45 to 65%. The way you see here, in the active composting stage, the moisture requirement is ranging in between 55 to 65%, whereas at the subsequent stages of curing as well as the storage, the moisture could be as low as 45 to 55%. So, maintaining adequate levels of the moisture within the compost pile is critical for microorganism survival because they require the water to sustain the metabolic as well as even the reproductive functions. As we discussed initially, it is also a media which is responsible for the transport of the nutrient for the metabolism of the bacteria. We can calculate this particular moisture content by using the simple mass balance as discussed by Worrell and Vesely in their book. So here this MP is the initial moisture content in percentage required in the compost pile. This MA is the percentage initial moisture content that is present in the shredded solid waste. This XA is the mass of solid waste as discarded in metric tons. This XS is the mass of the sludge or other source of the water that we intend to use. So, this mass balance can be used in order to work out the tons of the water or the sludge that needs to be added in order to achieve the desired moisture content in the compost pile. Here, we have considered this initial percentage moisture content required in the compost pile to be 50%, and for the 10-ton of the mixture, which is with the 7% of this moisture content, the quantity of the sludge that is required to be added comes to be 8.6 tons for the given data here. We can also compute the moisture content for a mix of a particular compost. Here, the first step is to determine the moisture content for the individual components of the mix that we wish to have for the composting. So already we have discussed about the determination of the moisture content. So this weight minus dry weight divided by weight as multiplied by 100, we can work out the moisture content of the individual components. According to the experience, we wish to have the target moisture content of 50 to 60% by weight for optimal composting conditions. So, knowing Qn as mass of component of material N on weight basis, that is as discarded, and the moisture content in percentage as Mn for that material N, we can calculate the relative amounts of the materials to combine to achieve that target moisture content MCT by making use of this expression Q1 M1 plus Q2 M2 plus Q3 M3 etc. divided by Q1 plus Q2 plus Q3. So by trial and error, we can have the different combination until we compute the resultant target in a reasonable range. If we to deal with two materials, with, say, mass of the second material Q2 required in order to balance the given mass of the first known mass of the material Q1 if the moisture content target is between the moisture contents of the two materials which are being mixed. The requisite quantity Q2 can be worked out by making use of this expression. Similarly, for three materials, the expression can be extended as given here. Next important parameter is temperature. For bacterial activity, we wish to have that temperature range optimally as 55 to 60 degrees centigrade. As we discussed initially for the microorganisms, above 60 degrees centigrade, there is a reduction in the bacterial activity. The aerobic processes are exothermic processes. Hence, there is an increase in the temperature of that compost pile. We can have that particular active composting further discussed through the action of mesophilic bacteria, subsequently thermophilic bacteria, and as the temperature reduces, further that mesophiles will enter and they will be existing over the remaining stages of this particular composting. However, in order to maintain the desired bacterial activity, we have to limit that particular temperature to say 60 degrees centigrade. So if that particular temperature is extending further, we can apply certain water in order to bring that particular temperature down. In addition, we wish to have the turnings of that heap of that compost so that entire pile can be turned upside down as well as inside out, and accordingly here as the mix is getting exposed to the atmosphere, it will cause the reduction in the temperature. So in order to maintain the specific activity of these bacteria, actinomycetes as well as fungi, the specific temperature ranges needs to be maintained. One more important consideration is here that this mix being derived through the municipal solid waste, there could be lot many parasites as well as even certain pathogenic bacteria. As we wish to use the resultant product as amendment for the soil as well as the fertilizing agent for certain saplings, we have to rather remove that pathogenic content. So as the temperature increases above this 55 degrees centigrade, say in the range of 1 hour, in fact that killing starts beyond 10 minutes. For some categories, it could be instant killing. So if the time is extended over the 3 days and if the temperature is maintained in the range of this 60 to 65 degrees centigrade, most of the pathogens are simply killed at these particular temperature ranges. One of the important parameters is carbon to nitrogen ratio. The microorganisms which are getting involved in the composting process need various nutrients such as phosphorus, potassium, carbon, nitrogen in order to survive as well as flourish and maintain their metabolism. Here the phosphorus, potassium are available in abundance. However, the carbon content and the nitrogen content are crucial as far as the maintaining bacterial activity is concerned. This bacteria utilizes about 30 parts of carbon for each part of the nitrogen. Hence, this C by N ratio must be maintained within the range of 26 to 31. As we consider the requirement of the carbon, it is essential for the energy as well as the growth of the microorganisms, as well as the nitrogen is essential for the protein synthesis and the reproduction of the new cells, and hence the continuation of the metabolic activity. So, in order to have this composting process functioning properly, these two nutrients must be available in sufficient quantities, and that too must be biological available for the organisms. As we consider the variety of the contents that we wish to add in the mix of the composting pit, here you can see that each of the materials that we will be adding would be having considerable different carbon to nitrogen ratios, and hence to mix them in proper proportion is very much essential. If the C by N ratio is low, there would be excess nitrogen which would be given off in the form of ammonia, and hence the bacterial activity will be less. In order to avoid this situation, we should add C-rich material like sawdust, wood with certain appropriate content in order to balance that C by N. Initially, the bacterial activity is very fast. The organic carbon is getting reduced, getting converted into the carbon dioxide, and if the N is not getting volatilized through ammonia, the C by N ratio will be considerably reduced, and hence there is a need to have certain amendments by adding some such carbon rich materials. Also, if that C by N ratio is high, the N will be limiting nutrient, the bacterial activity won't be synthesized, it won't proceed further, and hence the process may cease. As such, there is a need to add certain nitrogen rich material like certain green clippings, also certain food waste, some animal waste, sometimes even the blood is also added in order to have that C by N maintained in the desired range. We can compute the percentage of carbon by making use of this mass balance. Here, as you see, the Cp is percentage initial requirement in the compost pile. The Cr is percentage initial C present in the shredded solid waste. This Xr is the mass of solid waste as discarded in metric tons per day. Cs is the percentage C present in the total wet sludge to be added, and Xs is the total mass of the sludge. So, for the given data, if we consider this Cp, which is required to be maintained as 25, for the given data, we can work out the quantity of the sludge to be added as 100 tons per day. For a given mix, we can also compute the C by N ratio. Usually, the agencies who are working in this composting field, based on their experience, they maintain the C content as well as N content by balancing the greens and browns, so to say. If one is interested in using some refined processes, one can go for elemental analyzer and measure the carbon content and nitrogen content to calculate the ratio directly. As we discussed a couple of slides back, for the variety of the materials, the available literature suggests C by N ratio, so that can also be used. In addition, there are a lot many websites furnishing such kind of the information for the variety of the materials, as well as even there are number of calculators available in order to compute this C by N ratio. In order to have this C by N ratio calculated, we can follow even the mathematical approach. So here for the given mix, for the individual components of the mix, we can determine the moisture content as well as its mass on weight basis, the percentage C and percentage N on dry basis. So here one can make use of elemental analyzer as well as one can use the literature. Also, the ultimate analysis helps to work out the percentage C, percentage N, as we discussed about the physical and chemical characterization initially. So, this individual mass can be worked out by having the mass discarded multiplied with the 100 minus W, where this W is the moisture content. So that C by N can be worked out as M1C1 plus M2C2 plus M3C3 etc. divided by M1N1 plus M2N2 etc. Also, we can estimate the carbon content from the percentage ash or percentage volatile solids data if either of them is available. So this volatile solids is worked out by deducting the content of ash through the total solids. So the C content of the organic waste is ranging in between 45 to 60% of the volatile solids. So assuming it to be 55% as suggested by Adams et al., C percentage on the dry basis can be worked out as percentage of the volatile solids divided by 1.8. Certain researchers, as well as even some available literature, suggest use of cultures or addition of certain extraneous organism in the form of inoculum. However, as the recent studies suggest, such inoculum addition is not necessary as far as municipal solid waste content is there. If we consider certain the waste from the industry, if we consider from the waste from some other sources like agriculture, there could be requirement of addition of such cultures. However, for municipal solids, there are a lot many organisms which are initially present, and more importantly, they are already accustomed in that particular environment. So, the addition of the cultures or any extraneous organism is not essential as far as municipal solid waste composting is concerned. However, the process as such can be enhanced by addition of partially decomposed solid waste or the sewage sludge, which could be available in the nearby composting plants. So, this composting time could be reduced by seeding with partially decomposed solid waste to the extent of around 1 to 5% by wet. The addition of the sludge also helps in order to maintain and control the moisture content in the given compost pile. Aeration is important process as it is causing the supply of the oxygen for the bacterial activity. As we discussed earlier, the composting process requires adequate supply of the oxygen in order to maintain the aerobic conditions. If this condition is not maintained, anaerobic conditions will be developed and the entire composting process may take quite a considerable time. However, under aerobic conditions, the decomposition rate could be 10 to 20 times faster than under anaerobic conditions. Usually, if we consider the compost pile in the form of windrows, the inner layers are anaerobic, whereas the outer or superficial layers are aerobic. So, if we consider some such conditions, in order to have that anaerobic core conditions transformed into the aerobic conditions, we have to go for either turning the entire mix. So here the way you see in this particular sketch, the entire mix that is at the core is turned down, as well as the superficial content is also turned down. So this turning facilitates the supply of the oxygen at each of the corner of this particular heap. In addition, we can supply certain compressed air to the tune of 1 to 2 cubic meter per day per kg of volatile solids in order to maintain the theoretical oxygen demand by microorganisms throughout the composting process. Usually, these oxygen levels are expected to be in the range of 13 to 18%. If they are falling, there is a need to have certain correction done in order to maintain this oxygen level. So as you see, in the active composting stage, this oxygen demand is quite high as compared to that would be required at the subsequent stages of the curing as well as storage. In order to facilitate this aeration, one can adopt various mechanisms. So, this forced aeration refers to the practice of forcing the air through the compost pile using high pressure aeration fans and certain network of perforated pipes which are induced on certain impervious platform. So, when these aeration fans are used, they could be designed in order to blow the fresh air up through the compost piles, or otherwise it can be designed in order to suck the air out. This blowing air up through the piles is referred to be positive aeration, whereas sucking the air through these particular blowers is referred as negative aeration. Also, as bacterial activity proceeds and as there is a development of the temperature zones, with the increase in temperature, there is a development of certain convection currents, because of which the hotter air which is present initially in the core starts rising in the lateral direction as well as upwards, creating the vacuum at the bottom levels, and hence the air will be sucked at the bottom ends. So this aeration is termed to be passive aeration. In addition to that, the entire heap can be mechanically agitated. That is, it can be mixed by using either manual efforts or certain machinery such as front end loaders or certain windrow turner. Every 2 to 3 days, twice a week or so, the material is exposed to the ambient air, and hence that free air space that is required among the particles to be composted can be maintained, and hence the aerobic environment facilitates the composting operation to the desired order. As the entire process is associated with the bacterial activity as well as it is time dependent, there will be considerable change in the pH. So, initially, as the bacterial activity is fast, there would be some development of the temporary anaerobic conditions during which certain organic acids are formed, because of which the pH is reduced to 6. However, as subsequently thermophiles develop and as the process is reinstated, and if as the oxygen is available, accordingly the pH will range to 7.5. So at this particular stage, beyond that, there will be breakdown of the proteins, and also there will be formation of ammonia. Beyond this particular point, with the passage of around 3 to 4 weeks, there will be reduction in rate of the ammonia formation, and hence mostly the pH will be in the normal range. It would be in the neutral range. So initially, these organic compounds, sugar, starches, etc., are highly susceptible, whereas in the lateral stages, as we discussed initially, the actinomycetes as well as fungi will be taking over in order to break down these cellulose and lignin in these particular pH ranges. A high pH above 8.5 encourages the conversion of the nitrogen compounds into ammonia, which further adds the alkalinity in order to attain the value of pH 8. Also, the loss of the nitrogen in the form of ammonia to the atmosphere not only causes the nuisance of the odors, but it also reduces the nutrient value of the compost. Hence, adjusting the pH downward below 8 reduces the ammonia loss. This can be achieved by adding an acidifying agent such as superphosphate or elemental sulfur. So, thanks for your attention. I hope you have understood the role of the various operational parameters in order to facilitate effective composting. So, as we move ahead, we will discuss about the composting technologies which can be adopted for MSW. So, bye till then. I wish you very happy learning. Thank you.